Hello, welcome to another episode of the Brighter Thinking Pod from Cambridge University Press with me, your host, Tamsin Hart. My role at the Press is Senior Marketing Executive for our science titles, so I'm looking forward to discussing developing essential science skills for IB Sciences today. The Brighter Thinking Pod brings you bags of advice and conversation from some of our brighter thinkers, authors, teachers and academics, with a slice of entertainment on the side too. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at developing essential science skills for IB Sciences. And we're very lucky to be joined by Brenda Walpole, author from our IB Diploma Biology series. Brenda has taught IB for around 25 years at a top IB school in England and is also a teacher trainer. And Andreas Tsokos, author from our IB Diploma Physics series and retired IB teacher from Athens and Copenhagen. He's taught physics and maths for 32 years. Remember, all the links and information that we discuss are available in the show notes for your ease. And if you want to get your voice heard on the show, you can get in touch on Twitter using the hashtag BrighterPod or by email at educationmarketing@cambridge.org. Finally, please remember to like, review and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. So let's start by introducing our guest today. Hello, Brenda.
Hello, it's nice to be with you.
And hello, Andreas.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Brenda and Andreas. We appreciate you taking the time to share your experience with us today. Let's start with an icebreaker question. Which is the most important science? So if we surveyed 100 students, what would they say? As we've got a biologist and physicist here, I'm going to need someone to advocate for chemistry. What do you think, Andreas?
Well, obviously, all sciences are important. And I'm not going to fall into the trap of making or repeating some statements made by Rutherford, which are not particularly politically correct about the individual value of sciences. All sciences are important and all sciences are interesting. And obviously, you choose to do one over the other according to your interests, your curiosity, your skills, your career plans. And it would be wrong to focus on one science and call it the supreme science and ignore all the others. All are equally important.
A beautifully well-rounded answer there, Andreas. Thank you. And how about you, Brenda?
Well, I think about it more from the student's perspective, and I think that some would say biology is most important because understanding the natural world is so important in climate change, conservation, and protecting the environment for the future. Others might say that physics has made all the technical advances possible and without it we might not have electric cars, computers, or exploration of space. And just a little word for the chemists who are not with us today. I think some young people might say that chemistry is vital in all molecular sciences, in biology, in the production of new materials, plastics, fertilizers. And certainly if you asked younger children, they just say they love it for all the smells and the smoke and the explosions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brenda. Always love those links to the real world. And then let's ease ourselves into the main podcast. So here's a more general question about IB Science to establish the field in which our teachers are developing student skills. What do you think are the main challenges faced by IB Science teachers, Brenda?
I think students tend to worry about their prior knowledge, and very often the first thing a teacher has to do is to reassure them that they are going to be able to cope, that their background knowledge isn't going to hold them back, and a step-by-step approach will see them through.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brenda. And how about you, Andreas?
Well, I think when it comes to challenges to teachers, I would say any kind of teaching is a challenge, whether it is physics or history or even literature. I think teaching by itself is a challenge, and mainly because students learn in so many different ways that a teacher has to be creative and innovative to find ways to get to every student. And that's not easy. It's a huge challenge. But to get to specifically to the sciences and physics in particular, I would say that a major challenge, especially for a new teacher, is the fact that the syllabi that we have to cover, teach, they're vast. The present syllabus, for example, in physics, and I believe the same thing is true for biology and chemistry, they're huge. And a lot of teachers struggle to cover that syllabus. So that's the first challenge that a science teacher would face. And the other thing is the exam structure of our IB science courses. The exams are kind of special in the sense that we have command terms that are used in the exam questions. And it's very important that a teacher is very clear about what the command terms are, what they mean, and how to convey that information to students so that they don't waste time writing an essay type answer to a question that only requires a sentence. So these are major challenges, especially, I repeat, to new teachers. And again, something specific to physics is, in physics we have chemistry too. I don't know, I'm not sure about biology, but we have multiple choice questions. Multiple choice questions are usually considered by everyone to be the easy part of the exam, which is not the case. Multiple choice questions are very tricky. There's a lot of play on words, subtle differences between the various answers. So these are some of the major challenges I think that science teachers in the IB program face.
Very interesting. Thank you, Andreas. Now to take us to the main topic and the beginning of the IB Diploma student's journey, really. So, Andreas, what skills would you expect students to have before they start IB Physics?
Truth is, many times I started an IB class with students who never had any physics before. And obviously that's a problem. It would be nice if a student entering the IB program has had some kind of introduction to physics. I would say one of the major skills required is some basic familiarity with lab techniques, how to conduct a lab, how to write a lab report that is written in scientific language and not flowery language and things like that. Another skill for physics, we're talking about physics, but I'm going to mention the word mathematics. It's very important they have some really basic, good knowledge of basic algebra. Even though our courses are not mathematical, just a look at what the exam questions are like requires basic algebra in the sense that you have to take an equation and rearrange it and solve it for another variable. That's a basic skill. If you cannot do that, you cannot do well in physics. And the other thing, of course, is dividing a fraction by a fraction, which is a very elementary mathematical skill, but it is astonishing at how many questions, especially multiple choice questions, require this kind of skill. And a lot of students don't have it. They do a lot of math, but some basic arithmetic skills are missing. And I would say, if you are solid in your algebra and your arithmetic, that's a good first step.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andreas. It's very interesting that you mentioned mathematical skills, because we've found from our research that even very able mathematicians kind of compartmentalize that knowledge and they find it hard to apply that to science. So have you found that to be the case?
That is correct, because in mathematics, for example, there is this centuries-old tradition of calling variables y and x. And students seem to be comfortable working with Y and X. But if you change the names, they get confused. So yeah, that's very important.
Yeah. And for our listeners, they might be interested in another podcast we have recorded with the Association for Science Education based on their research into this exact same problem and the solutions that they put forward, which led to us developing with them a series of workbooks. So math skills workbooks in the context of each of the individual sciences. And we'll put links to that in the show notes. And Brenda, so what skills would you expect students starting out on an IB biology course to have?
Well, I'd agree with Andreas that many students come certainly to IB biology with no prior formal education in biology. But it's probably slightly easier for biologists. They do have a general exposure to the natural world, to their bodies, to the environment, and particularly in modern times, there's a lot in the press and publicity generally, which will expose them to an overview of the subject. The most important skills I think they need are a sense of inquiry and a wonder about how living things work, and not just furry animals, but the interest in microscopic and cellular organisms as well as whole organisms and ecosystems. I'd certainly agree that basic maths and chemistry are important, but probably less so than in physics and chemistry. Maths is needed for basic calculations, data analysis, some statistics. But in general, I've found that most students are able to acquire these skills if they're supported through the course.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brenda. Andreas, you seem like you might want to comment upon what Brenda had just said. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I agree that biology probably has somewhat less of a need for this kind of mathematical skill. But it is crucial in physics, though. I would say most crucial in physics, then chemistry, then biology. And when it comes to this preparation of skills before they enter the IB program, I think it's a good idea to, if the school curriculum can allow it so it can fit in, it's a good idea for students to spend a day in an IB class before they enter the IB program, just to see the pace at which the material is being delivered, which usually is quite fast, and to gauge the difficulty of what is being said. Because usually one thing that students find is that the level of difficulty of their classes in the pre-IB classes is much, much lower than what they have in the IB. So there's a huge step that has to be taken. So it's a good idea to know that before you enter the IB program.
Thank you, Andreas. And as we've kind of somewhat covered there, presumably there are situations where students start the course with less skills than they need. So Brenda, what do you think are the main challenges to developing the skills required to starting an IB Diploma Science course?
I would say not to scare the students off. Andreas has touched upon the diversity of students we have, the range of skills that they have. So I think a step-by-step approach and recognition that you can focus on one aspect, for example, statistics, and get that dealt with before you have to use other areas of mathematics or other areas of subject skills. One step at a time, I would say, will help to support students who are worrying about their knowledge of certain aspects. Practical skills, that's something else that can be acquired along the way. Use of apparatus in the lab scares some students, but once they get their hands in and they've done a little field work, the skills will soon follow, particularly if they can be supported within a class by other students who have greater skills than they might have.
Thank you, Brenda. And so, Andreas, what do you think have been the main challenges to developing those skills?
Well, I agree with Brenda. The practical work, the lab work, is scary to most students, even though they enjoy being in the lab. But when it comes to writing the report, that's when the problems begin. And if they haven't had experience with lab work before the IB, then it's a problem. It's a challenge for the students. So, as Brenda said, take it one step at a time. Start with an easy lab with fairly straightforward apparatus that more or less everyone will have seen before, and guide the students in writing the report. And of course, one really big headache, both for students and for teachers, is this thing that we call the internal assessment. In the sciences, students are graded, something like 24% of their grade is determined by this thing called the IA, the internal assessment project, which is usually an experiment and a report that the student has to write. And it has been graded, and the grade counts towards the final IB grade. And I would say the best way to develop the skills for the IA and reduce this anxiety for the IA is simply to always have a practice IA. That is to say, a project that is not going to count for anything. It's just a practice experiment. Everyone does the same thing. Everyone writes a report. And then the students give feedback on each other's work, because that's what the grade is mainly determined. It's the quality of the report. How well is your data? How good is the data that you have collected? How good are the data? Did you analyze it? How did you do your error analysis? What are your conclusions? What is your evaluation? These are difficult things for a beginning student in science. And if you do a practice one and you get feedback from other students, you will be amazed at how much better your next project is going to be. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andreas.
If I could just add there, if I may.
Please do.
One way that I have found helps students immensely is to subdivide the internal assessment project into the basic components. These are designing an experiment, making a risk assessment. Is it going to be safe? Is it going to harm any organisms that you're using? Doing the experiment and collecting the data, then analysing it, and then drawing your conclusions. It's quite possible to separate those components into their parts and just do maybe designing an experiment for one practical. And then in another lesson, give them the experiment and ask them to collect sufficient data. If you separate the components, they become less scary. And as Andreas says, students can support each other, criticise each other's work without fearing they're going to be penalised for doing so. And everybody makes good progress.
Brilliant. Thank you. Some very practical advice there. Moving on, do you think, Andreas, that the pandemic and remote learning has impacted on students' skill sets?
Absolutely, for the worse. The pandemic has been terrible for teaching and learning. And we see it, for example, in the very low grade boundaries of the recent exams. Students who went through the pandemic and now have taken exams, the grade boundaries have been much, much lower than they are normally. So yes, of course, sitting alone at home in front of a screen may be okay for a little bit, but for a sustained period of time without the teacher next to you to discuss and to give you feedback, I think it has been terrible for learning.
Thank you, Andreas. And what are your thoughts on this, Brenda?
Well, I agree with everything Andreas has said. Students returning to class are not as good at teamwork as they were formerly. And direct communication with their peers and their teachers is something that needs reinvigorating. lab skills obviously are difficult or impossible to do remotely. But on the other hand, on a positive note, I would say that most students' IT skills and skills on Zoom and Teams have probably increased significantly.
Yes, that's right.
It's nice to be able to take a positive from it. Do you feel similarly, Andreas?
Yeah, okay, I agree.
And from a teacher's perspective, do you think the use of technology in remote teaching has perhaps made them more creative in their approach to teaching, or not?
Oh yeah, you had to be innovative and find new ways of getting to the student. For example, I bought a document camera so that whenever I used to teach remotely, I would have the camera on, and the camera would show my notebook. So everything I write on the notebook is seen by the student. So it was just like writing on the board. Yeah, I mean, technology has helped a lot.
And Brenda, do you agree?
Yes, I think so. Certainly, teachers have had to prepare their lessons more carefully, make sure that they've got a record of everything they've taught. When a student is ill, for example, they've had to supply that lesson in an alternative form, and that has increased teachers' skill sets, I would say.
Brilliant, thank you. So to continue this thought, what can teachers then do to support their students in developing their skills before taking IB Science? What do you think, Brenda?
Well, I think we've covered a number of points already in the pre-IB sessions that some schools are able to offer. I agree that with Andreas's comment about sitting in on a lesson or two, just to make sure that you've made the right choice of subject. Students have to choose 6 subjects, and one of them has to be a science. But it doesn't have to be higher level physics or higher level chemistry. It can be a standard level science. And, by exposing students to these subjects before they actually make their final decisions can make the difference between choosing the correct subject, which they will enjoy studying, and one which is going to cause them stress and anxiety.
Brilliant, thank you, Brenda. And Andreas, what are your thoughts?
Yes, definitely. If the school offers the IB subjects that you want to study before the IB, then you should definitely take it. So if you want to do physics in the IB, it would be a good idea to take physics in the pre-IB class. But I would say to potential IB students, when they're about to enter the IB program, I would say enjoy your summer before the IB program starts, because the next summer will be non-existent. The summer between year 1 and year 2 of the IB won't be much of a summer. It'll be very busy time finishing your IAs and your extended essays and all the other kind of work. So don't stress too much, enjoy your summer, and fill up your batteries for the IB program.
Thank you, Andreas. So apart from avoiding stress, is there anything specific that students can do themselves?
They definitely have to learn how to be systematic and organized in their work. I think one of the big secrets of success in the IB program is that you are organized and you're systematic in your study. If you expect that you're going to spend 18 hours a day working for the exam the day before the exam, that won't do it. The IB program and the syllabi that we have to work with are vast, as I said before, and therefore you have to have sustained and consistent work over the 2 years of the IB program. You cannot leave everything for the last minute. It just won't work that way. So being systematic, being organized, that's a key.
Brilliant, thank you. Very sensible advice. And Brenda, do you have anything to add?
I think self-motivation is very important as well. Students have to want to study and enjoy studying the subjects that they've chosen. Self-motivation and independence are skills that the IB program tries to develop and nurture within students who take the diploma program. And organisation and self-motivation, very important.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, let's consider the IB diploma itself. How would you develop student skills over the course of the IB Biology diploma, Brenda?
Well, some of the things I would suggest have been touched upon already. I think you have to go from well scaffolded tasks with lots of support, full instructions, and so on, and move on to more general tasks without a framework, where students have to begin independent work and think for themselves until finally they feel confident to take on tasks themselves. As far as the course content is concerned, well, again, it's important to begin where the students are. Start at the beginning. Don't jump in with the most complicated topic first. And make students realise that certainly in biology is for life. It's not just for exams. Everything they learn, whether or not they choose to study biology further, is going to be important and relevant in their life. And we've got to nurture that enjoyment and understanding of what's going on around them and inside them.
That's a lovely idea. And what would your approach for physics be, Andreas?
Well, I would say that in order to ensure success with the practical program, namely the IA, we really need to have a very well-organized, well-scaffolded practical program that will develop slowly, one lab after the other, develop all the skills that you need in order to write a successful IA. And that usually takes about a year. I mean, most students are able to write their science IA at the end of the first year of the IB, if not at the beginning of the second year. And by that time, a good practical program should have given them all the skills in order to write a good IA. When it comes to the rest of the program, I would say a very key thing is to practice past exam questions very, very heavily, because that will give you the experience of what is required to answer exam questions. So when I used to teach, I think I would just plunge into all the exam questions, maybe after 10 days, after a week or two of beginning the course. So I never used to shy away from exam questions, and I use them very heavily. The other thing is, related again to exam questions, is it's very, very important, and we mentioned it before, the command terms, the command verbs that are being used in exams. It's absolutely crucial that from day one, students understand the meaning of these questions. So if a question begins with state, all we want is half a sentence stating a simple fact without explanation, without discussion. But if a question starts with discuss or explain, then we really need a detailed, analytic, sophisticated answer to the question. And the two should not be confused. So it's very important to get students to understand the meaning of these terms. And again, I bring this up, multiple choice questions. From the very beginning, students should have as much practice with multiple choice questions, because unlike what people think, they're not easy and they need practice.
Now, let's think about some different types of skills. What role, Andreas, do 21st century skills such as critical thinking, communication skills, problem solving play in successful IB studies?
Very important. And I will add to that also group work and obviously, these are skills that are necessary in any job, in any career that one follows these days. And I think the IB program is quite good in developing the skills through the internal assessment, the writing of the report, which has to be written succinctly, clearly, in a scientific language, accurately, precisely, and so on. Then in the internal assessment, again, they have to do an evaluation of what the whole experiment was all about. So that evaluation requires a critical look at how the experiment was conducted, what assumptions were made, what are the possible sources of error, how could those sources of error, how could they have been eliminated. So absolutely, these are skills that are absolutely crucial. And I think the IB program, not just in the sciences, but in general, does a good job in developing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andreas. Do you have anything further to add, Brenda?
Well, I think, yes, social collaboration, working together is a skill that most employers want. Communication skills that Andreas has already mentioned. Self-management is another skill that employers want. I mean, in science, they have to assess the risks of any experiment that they carry out. And also, as we've already mentioned, technology and the awareness of wider issues. These are all skills that will be developed in the IB program and that are valuable to an employer. It's worth also mentioning that these skills are not exclusive to science. All of them should be supported in other subjects. Theory of knowledge, for example, understanding how we get to understand. International awareness, that's something else which we haven't actually mentioned yet. Most IB classes consist of students from all over the world, and learning to work together is very much a 21st century skill that employers and whatever role students take in the future will be valuable and necessary.
Thank you, Brenda. Now, we've talked a little bit about next steps there. So what skills need to be developed to prepare students for further study and potentially a career in science? What do you think, Brenda?
Well, before this podcast, I made a checklist of the skills that I thought would be important if a student was going on to study science in the future. And bear in mind, certainly from my subject, all kinds of options are open, from medicine to marine biology to forensic science. All of these require or are likely to have required biology in the past. Skills, I listed resilience. If you're going to be a scientist, you've got to be able to take the knockbacks when your experiment doesn't go quite right or your data comes out completely contrary to what you were expecting. You've got to be able to be independent as well as working in a team. You've got to be self-motivated. If you're going to be a research scientist, for example, you've got to be able to put in the hours, stay there in the evening and finish the experiment. And you've got to be responsible for that work. You've got to own the work. It's yours. I'd say a crucial thing for a scientist is a hard work ethic. Anyone who studies science at university will know that science students spend far more time in the classroom, in the lecture hall, and in the laboratory than someone who's studying English or liberal arts. Hard work is important, and as we've already mentioned, organisational skills are absolutely crucial.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brenda. And how about you, Andreas?
Well, Brenda mentioned the word resilience, which is also one of the words I would like to use. And I would add to that perseverance as well. You see, the problem is that, and now talking about physics, if you compare your typical physics class in high school, let's say in the IB program, and a class in physics at university in the first or second year, I mean, the comparison is day and night. If you compare the difficulty of a homework problem in IB with a homework problem at university, the comparison is day and night. I mean, students have to be aware that when they get to university, things are going to get harder. And in order to succeed at a university level science class, they really have to work very, very hard. They have to work long hours, and they cannot easily give up when either the experiment doesn't give the required results because something went wrong, or because your calculations, you made a mistake somewhere and you're not getting the right answer. So two of the characteristics of scientific work is resilience and perseverance. You cannot give up when something goes wrong, and you have to persist until you get the right answer and you get to the end of whatever it is that you're trying to get to. So I would say this is what I would advise students to pay attention to.
Brilliant. Very sound advice from you both there. Thank you. Let's consider now the situation where a student doesn't want to continue with their science studies after the diploma. What transferable skills, Andreas, do you think they will take away with them, and how will they be useful for them?
I think training in a science, whether it is biology or physics or chemistry or computer science or whatever, one of the things that you take away from that study is critical thinking. And we are surrounded by conspiracy theories about everything. We are surrounded by fake news about all kinds of things. And if you don't have the critical thinking skills to dissect all this information, then you're drowning, and then you're being drawn in directions that don't make any sense. So critical thinking skills is what one gets from science, and they will be able to use those skills for the rest of their lives. Specifically to physics, I would say physics, more than the other sciences and more than even mathematics, gives one a very important skill, which is the magnitude of a number. It sounds very simple thing to say, but we are surrounded by numbers, numbers in trillions of dollars or whatever it is that the debt of some country is, and similar numbers. And it's very important to have an understanding of how big numbers are. And one story that I really like is a long time ago when President Ronald Reagan in the US initiated this SDI program, what used to be called Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative, where laser beams would shoot down enemy incoming ballistic missiles. And a group of senators and congressmen had visited the lab where the lasers were being developed, and one of the senators asked, what kind of power do we need for these lasers? And the man in charge over there said, something like 10 to the 10 watts. And the senator then said, and how much have we achieved so far? And the man said, 10 to the 5 watts. And the senator said, great, we're halfway there. Well, we're nowhere near halfway there. That shows a complete lack of understanding of the magnitude of numbers. And similarly, when a long time ago, when I used to grade exams, I would get scripts where a question would say, estimate, given some data, estimate the diameter of a human eye. And you would see answers from students 3 kilometers long. And there was no second thought as to correct it and maybe make a comment. Obviously, I made a mistake. It cannot be 3. So the magnitude of numbers is a very important skill in life.
It certainly seems so. Thank you, Andreas. And Brenda, you covered this a little already, but what are your further thoughts on this?
Well, I agree that critical thinking is vital, but from my perspective, I think understanding the natural world, understanding what the likely consequences of climate change are going to be. And even if you're never studying biology again after you leave school, what you have gained from the subject is a knowledge of what's going on inside your body. If someone says, oh, I may have a heart attack, you'll know what is likely to have caused it. Everybody is going to be exposed at some point to creating new life and understanding how that process takes place and how organs develop. It's so important. You're never going to be a doctor with an IB Biology diploma, but you will understand what your doctor is talking about when he or she refers to different parts of the body and where they are. A very interesting fact that you can try with your students is to ask them where the various organs of the body are. Where are your kidneys? Do you know? And so many people just don't know, and they have no idea what their kidneys do. But when you've studied IB biology, you at least have a knowledge of these things that will set you up for the rest of your life.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brenda. Lots of real life implications from both of you there. So it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion today. Thank you both very much for your thoughts on developing students' science skills for the IB Diploma. But before we leave today, can I ask what are your top 3 tips for our teachers to take away on how to support their learners developing essential science skills? How about you, Andreas?
3 tips. I would say number 1 is the teacher should know the syllabus that they're teaching inside out. They should know what is on the syllabus and what is not on the syllabus. The second tip would be practice exam questions over and over and over again. And my third tip would be join a group of fellow IB teachers, either the one that the IB provides, it's called My IB, or there are many other groups on social media. It's extraordinary how useful information you can get by discussing with your fellow teachers on these platforms. So these would be my 3 tips.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andreas. And how about you, Brenda?
Well, I'd support everything that Andreas has said, and I would add, as far as the teaching goes and developing skills, start slowly where the students are. Get students to support each other to develop their skills and make lessons and practicals fun, relevant to life, so that students really want to know. They don't just want to pass their exams. And while we're here, I think it might be worth flagging up the content in the course books, which is Science in Context. What we've done, all 3 authors of the science titles in the CUP series have included Science in Context, which is just a little section in each chapter which relates what the students are learning to the real world. So, for example, when they're studying nerves, they might also study what multiple sclerosis is. And when they're studying carbohydrates and fats, they might also look at what aspects of diet might lead to a person becoming overweight, for example. So Science in Context, I'd like to raise the flag for this little section of our course books.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brenda. And I'll put a link to those course books and the whole new series for those new editions, which are coming out later this year, in the show notes. Thank you both so much for sharing your valuable insights today. And that's all for our Developing Essential Science Skills for IB Sciences episode today. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and rate our show on whatever platform you're listening on. Our show notes, as I've mentioned, have lots of useful links that we've discussed throughout the show. Follow us on Twitter at CUP Education or use the hashtag #BrighterThinking to respond. You can also email us at educationmarketing@cambridge.org. Thank you so much.